The topic we have for you today is kind of a unique methodology for fruition partners to accelerate the time and value in your ServiceNow investment. My name is Mike DePolis. I'm the head of our consulting group here at Fruition Partners. So any project that has an IT service management component, my group is involved in, whether it's tied to a ServiceNow implementation or separated ITSM consulting. My group of ITSM experts and ITIL experts is heavily involved in those activities. Just a quick note about Fruition Partners. Been in business for about 10 years, have over 10 years of practical ITSM experience, and that's really from a company perspective. We have many people in my group with many more years of ITSM experience even beyond that. We are a premier implementation partner with ServiceNow, and that includes a team of over 100 cloud experts that help with the implementations and customizations. And we have really done more ServiceNow implementations than anybody. We're over 200 plus and rapidly growing. Within our skill set is the ServiceNow implementation, obviously, as well as the consulting. We'll also do integrations and development, and we also have some managed service offerings around both ServiceNow and around ITSM. What I'd like to talk about today is essentially, if you think about implementations and consulting services, there's kind of the old way that's been out there forever. And I want to talk a little bit about what that old way looks like and really why we felt at Fruition Partners that it's a bit broken and really felt that there was a better way to do it. And I'm going to talk through what our methodology looks like and how that compares and contrasts from the old way of both tool implementations and ITSM services and maturity. Really the name of our methodology for that is what we call our Best Practice Accelerator, or BPA. So I'd like to step through what that methodology looks like, what the advantages of that methodology are, and where the value proposition is for a client of ours who's using the Best Practice Accelerator. Also going to talk a little bit about the specifics of the Best Practice Accelerator instance, which is really part of that methodology and is central to that methodology, as well as what a typical activation, which is the word we use actually rather than implementation, for getting up and running with a BPA and what that means. Also talk through a little bit about the target organizations and really who is BPA right for, where have we seen BPA be successful, what kind of organizations are a good fit for it, and then also talk about what BPA might look like or does look like for existing ServiceNow users. So if we look at the old way from an implementation perspective, I'll talk about consulting in a second, but kind of the old way for implementation is we're really starting from scratch and really start with, well, let's talk about functional requirements and talk about what we need in the tool, and almost from the perspective of, okay, customer, well, what do you want? And what we found in the industry is, well, what you want is you want some more stronger guidance than that, and you want a really more rapid solution rather than starting from kind of this ethereal set of functional requirements to iterating it through to more detailed requirements. Which really, it takes a long time, or in some cases, even rather than starting with good requirements, it has almost been well, let's figure it out as we go approach. We'll try a few things and we'll take a look at it and we'll take it from there, depending on the organization. And it does a couple of things. One is it doesn't really give us a solid foundation with the strategy behind it for the requirements of what will ultimately be tool implementation. You get some of the big buckets in there and you work that through, but not necessarily having a plan to find the strategic outcome that you're looking for with an implementation. The other thing that we have seen in the past is, as you iterate through the implementation or through the requirements, as time goes by, what we hear more and more often is, well, wait a minute, we need to have this piece in here. Our current tool has this field or these forms, and has this particular functionality, so naturally we need to recreate that because we have that and we continue to need that. Rather than really challenging and looking at it as an opportunity to get to a better state, rather than bring artifacts and bring quite often debris, frankly, from current tool set into the new tool implementation. And it's just kind of a natural evolution that happens when you have lengthy requirements and kind of an old implementation model. The other thing that we see a lot is, well, as we're going through requirements and going through implementation, there's a lot of focus on the operational elements. So we need, talk a lot about, how do we derive location, for example, especially in larger organizations, and what, contact types, et cetera, and really focus on the operational aspect of the tool, from moving a ticket from point A to point B on any given incident, for example, on any given day. And certainly operational elements are important. We need to make sure that we have the operational data that we need within our tool. But what we tend to do when we fall into that trap is we forget about the more strategic data elements that we might need, or the more strategic functionality to ensure that, not only can we move an incident or move a problem or move a change through the tool on a day-to-day basis, but to get the kind of KPI enabling and strategic data elements in the tool that we're going to be able to use to analyze ourselves after the fact as we continue to operate in the tool, to make sure that we have the data as necessary for continual improvement. The other typical outcome of kind of the old way of implementation is it's a longer time cycle, and it's expensive. The longer that an implementation takes, you're not getting the value from your tool during the implementation period, and the more costly it is. So now if we look at the old way from a consulting approach that's been done from years and years, is once again, you notice our first bullet is the same, is we start from scratch. So what you end up with is a lot of boots on the ground, if you will, for a long period of time, and really start reinventing the wheel. So consultants will come in, I've seen consultancies come into organizations, and they'll take 4 months and sit with the client and design an incident management process. There's really no need to start with step one on a Visio with the client, and okay, we're going to submit the incident, and then we'll draw box 2 and we'll talk that through and the procedures. It's a very lengthy, document-focused and theory-based consulting model that takes a long time and is very expensive, when really there's a better way to do that. That's kind of the old consulting model. It's still very much in use today by many organizations. One of my colleagues actually at Fruition Partners, who came from another company, and they talked about how they spent between $600,000 and $1 million on an incident management process, and I believe one other process, and it took an incredibly long period of time, obviously an incredibly expensive consulting engagement, and it's really just not necessary to do that to get to the proper value. The other thing that we see with the old way in the consulting model is it's so focused on the process and the documents, almost like we'll talk about CSI later. Let's get the process documented and the process elements documented and agreed to, and then we'll come back and talk about continual service improvement later. The problem with that approach is if you don't think about continual service improvement right up front, you're probably not enabling yourself with the right data elements and the right process aspects, and even the right mindset from an organizational change perspective to really ever get into CSI, or continual service improvement. So it's something that we very much need to think about right up front. At Fruition Partners, we look at this model and we say, this is really an unnecessary model. We instinctively knew that there was a better way to do this, where you could derive more value for the client more quickly, and not have, from a resource perspective, so much commitment from a consulting firm. So we realize that the old model is really, it's not good for the client, and it's not good for us. It's very expensive for both of us. It's very resource intensive for both of us. How do we get to better processes, a better state of maturity in a more rapid fashion? Which led us to develop our new method for both consulting and for implementation. And the very first part of that is start with the best of breed. So rather than going to a client and starting from scratch, developing an incident management process, for example, or a change management process, we, like every other consultancy, we've done this over and over and over again. We don't need to reinvent the wheel and start from scratch. So we're going to start by bringing the best of breed as part of our methodology. We're going to come in the very first day with, here is our best of breed incident management process, based not only upon ITIL, certainly it's very, very founded and grounded in ITIL, but also just from our extensive ITSM experience, and from our experience of just simply doing this in the trenches for so many years. So very ITIL based, but we very much like to say that we're not ITIL academics, we're ITIL realists. And we're going to take the best of breed from ITIL, and we're going to tack on what we've seen works well from our experience. And we're going to start with that day one from the ground up, so that we are essentially, if you looked at the old model, probably 3 months or 3.5 months, ahead of where one of those old models like I described would be. The next goal that we had in designing this new methodology was to implement rapidly. The longer the implementation takes, obviously, the more it costs, and you're also not deriving value. In fact, you're losing value while you're waiting for this tool to actually go online and then provide some value. So we wanted a method that not only do we rapidly accelerate the processes, but we rapidly accelerate the implementation. The next goal that we had when we were designing our new methodology is to increase maturity easily. So we can design new processes, and that definitely gets us a start towards better maturity. We can implement a new tool rapidly, but we wanted to design within that, both the tool and the implementation and the process, a way that simply by using the new tool, which follows the best of breed process, we're going to almost automatically increase our maturity, because we're going to do things within the tool that drive towards what a more mature organization would do. Lastly, we also wanted to, right up front, make sure that we were enabling what we needed for continuous service improvement. We wanted to make sure that both the process and the tool had the elements necessary to wrap up everything that we needed, so that as soon as we start operating in the tool, we're going to be gathering and we're going to be collecting the data and information necessary so that we can easily report both to a business level and report at an IT level the items and elements that we need to review and understand, so that we can see how we're doing, where we're doing well, where we need improvement from an operational perspective. So what those goals ended up becoming was what we call the Best Practice Accelerator, which is really the name for the methodology to be able to accomplish all of those goals that we just looked at. So what is the Best Practice Accelerator? The first thing it is it's that best of breed process that I talked about. We start there. It is defined and it's included in any BPA engagement. It's something that that we give to the client and we work with the client on as a first part of the methodology. It's there, it's supplied, and it's ready to go. Now, we've also taken that best practice process and we've implemented it within ServiceNow so that it's fully automated, it's fully enabled, so the tool simply follows through doing what you should do as part of the process. In addition to the process, the BPA is also a pre-configured instance of ServiceNow, containing all the process automation, containing all of the data elements to support operational needs as well as KPI needs. And then as part of the methodology, we help do any tailoring that's necessary for your organization. And I'll talk a little bit later in a little more detail about what that tailoring looks like. So if we look at the BPA instance of ServiceNow itself, this is what we have pre-built within Fruition Partners. It's very process-centric, so all of the processes, the procedures, if you think about even the RACI chart, the responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed, the tool matches the workflow, the procedures will match the RACI and put the appropriate tasks or items to the appropriate roles as defined within the instance. And it's also, as I mentioned, it's pre-configured, so this lends itself to a very rapid implementation. What we like to say is that a BPA instance is typically 80 to 85% or even more, depending on your organization, pre-configured. And then what we will help you do is tailor the last 15 or 20% of that to any unique needs of your organization, and of course some core setup things like getting your assignment groups and your services, etc., within the tool. So if you think about an 80% configured instance, you're right there saving 70 to 80% of your implementation time because rather than all of that configuration time, it's all set to go. It's very much reporting ready. So the data elements that we've chosen, every data element and field within the BPA instance has a purpose and has a purpose for either KPIs or some other operational item to ensure that we get the proper reporting for CSI. So when we talk about pre-configured, There's a number of items that have been defined within the instance. We stick to ITIL terminology for labels and state models as defined by ITIL. State transition models. We include notification templates and all of the triggers. We handle or have defined the inbound email processing rules. So what happens if when someone emails your support desk, for example. All of the ITIL roles and permissions are configured. So if you go back and look at our process collateral that we bring to the table as part of this methodology, we're going to have matching roles that fit that exact RACI already configured within the system. We also bring common service categorization scheme, which I'll talk about in a little bit. We bring a lot of operational reporting, KPI reporting, and all of the business rules and logic to support the processes as they have been defined, all included directly within the tool. A big staple of the BPA instance is the data model that I have been talking about. In addition to supporting KPIs for CSI, it also really supports advanced business reporting. So as we think about the reporting that we do, there's certainly the IT operational focused reporting. Another bucket would be the IT continual service improvement reporting. But in terms of keeping the business, getting them the information that they really need in terms of how IT is doing, we have the data model that will support giving them essentially BI for their IT department, your business's IT department, to show them some metrics in business terms rather than in IT terms. One of the benefits that we also get out of the data model is that if you look at an organization that has spent years and years, and apologize for my computer acting up here, if you look at a business that has spent years and years developing a CMDB and they're doing some auto discovery and they started mapping relationships to applications and maybe to business services over time, there's a lot of value to be derived from that, both from an operational perspective, from a change management and risk assessment perspective, et cetera. But that takes a long time. It's very difficult to actually get a CMDB into that state. It takes a lot of money and a lot of effort and a lot of continual upkeep. And while certainly a CMDB should be utilized, the categorization model that we provide with the BPA instance is going to give you a lot of the value as if you had that very mature CMDB without actually having it. And I'm going to talk through that in a little more detail in a second. So if you look at our data model, we've made sure that every data element that we include in our BPA instance falls into one of the three categories that you see below. So for each form and field, we're going to say, is this really enabling KPIs? So for example, do we have a data element on first line resolution or first call resolution, which is a KPI enabling metric? Or does it serve an absolutely necessary operational purpose? Or is it simply profile information that is very tactical and somewhat operational as well in terms of where is a user or where is a device? But we scrutinize the data model to make sure that we are fulfilling one of the missions of these three categories of data elements. And if we have a client request, or if we think about a new information element to go into the BPA, we're going to challenge that data element and make sure that it has a use here, so that it's not just more noise amongst the vast amount of data that we already have out there. So I wanted to talk through, outside of the data model itself, a couple of the best practice accelerator key features. First and foremost is the categorization model I alluded to a moment ago. Many organizations struggle with categorization. I've seen a number of organizations where it's almost like they're on a cycle of every 2 or 3 years they realize that their categorization is cumbersome, it's messy, it's not serving them well, it's maybe not very well defined, so they set about down the path of trying to redefine it again or modify it, and they take some action on it, they spend a lot of time on it, and they come out the backside of that effort and really end up essentially in the same place that they were. And if any of you have gone through categorization discussions or efforts in your environments, and I'm pretty sure you're well aware of that, it's not the most fun exercise, and it can take a long time. There's typically a lot of dissent and disagreement on what belongs where and what the structure should even look like. What we do with the BPA is we try and alleviate that for you by providing a categorization model out of the BPA box, if you will. The categorization model that we use is much more than your typical CTI or SCIM type of categorization model that many organizations use, because we have the realization that those models, while partially effective, they don't lend themselves to really getting you to information on end-to-end services, which is where we want to be from a categorization and reporting, and even just from an understanding perspective within IT. Is from an end-to-end business service perspective, what kind of impacts have we had? What kind of impacts will we have, for example, if we conduct a certain change? That's another part of the categorization discussion that I've seen organizations have a lot of struggles with, is even really defining what their business services are, and defining that at an appropriate level for their organization. And those efforts, like categorization, tend to be problematic and quite often even end in failure in an organization, so they never really get to being able to get that view of end-to-end business services as they should. So our categorization model accounts for the end-to-end business services. It also very much accounts for the provider or IT services that we offer that support and underpin the business services. And then we also have component categorization that supports more specific detail about whatever record we're categorizing, whether it's an incident, a problem, or a change. A big thing to point out here is that the model is, first of all, it's predefined, so very much of the model is already there, especially at a component categorization level, and to some extent at a business service and provider service level. All of the common services you would see in really any organization exist. But as part of a BPA activation, we help you define your business services. We provide a model. We help you decompose a number of your services so that you're well on the track to doing the final population of your business services with just a little bit of homework and some of our guidance to make sure that right off the bat we have that taken care of, so you're not left walking the forest, so to speak, trying to figure out where the rest of your services are. So the reason that we have this model, and this model, by the way, has been defined over 10 or 15 years, really defined and refined from some very deeply rooted CMDB experts, and has been used to great success in large organizations and small organizations alike to really drive the operational and the KPI elements that we need. So just one example of why this is important is if you were to look at the following scenario, and the way I like to say this or talk about this is, the story of a CIO is at his company's annual meeting, and he is tasked with giving a report out of how their organization is doing from an IT perspective, and he stands up and says, pick your service. In this case, I have kind of an example of messaging up here, but the messaging service or whatever service have you has been up 100% of the time for the last year. And everyone else in the room kind of snickers and chuckles, and some people are frowning, potentially some red in the face, and his superior stands up and says, I hate to tell you this, but that's not even close to true. We continue to seem to have problems with this here and there. You really need to go back and figure out what you're talking about. And so the CIO goes back and works with his team and tasks them with finding out what has happened. And they go back and look, and sure enough, they see that they had a number of incidents regarding some servers that are involved with that business service. But if you were to look at like a typical CTI type of categorization model, they were coded as hardware and server and what have you, without really speaking to the actual service involved, or did not account for the 300 incidents that came in from one of the regional offices where it was really the desktops that were affected because of a patch that had failed, but there were some key players in that part of the organization that really needed to get to the service in question. So they could not tie it all together to the end-to-end service. So by using our model, we're able to pull reporting to see all of the incidents, for example, that were recorded against the messaging service, and then we click or dive into that more and say, all right, we've had a number of interruptions in messaging. What really is at the root of that? What is really causing that? And we can see from an IT provider service such as data network, app hosting, or server, and database, etc., we can see the breakout of really where those incidents occur. And we can see from this particular example, if I'm deep diving my messaging service, I can see that, well, we had a number of desktop issues that were really called in by someone saying, well, I can't get to email or I can't get to something else, and it was really desktop related. But in addition to that, well, we have quite a few database incidents against this service. So let's dive in and find out what's happening with those database incidents and why they're occurring. So this is just one example of using a proper categorization model like we have defined within the BPA can really provide a lot of value for you. One of the other key features that I would like to point out about the BPA is what we refer to in the tool as the QA tab. The example that you see here is a QA tab from the incident management portion of the BPA. And it contains a lot of information that's useful both from a KPI and an operational perspective. If I'm an incident manager, I can come in here and take a look and very quickly see what's happening with any given incident that I might be interested in. Everything from, was this tier 1 created, is it first line resolved or first call resolved? How many times has it been reassigned? I can very quickly see that, so that when you get the incidents out there occasionally that have 52 reassignments on them, you could either report directly on this or come into the QA tab and see this. So a lot of useful information. Every bit of data that you see here is automatically calculated based upon actions that occur within the BPA. So none of this has to be pulled as separate reporting. None of it has to be manually calculated or figured out. The BPA just automatically does this. The QA tabs exist for every process that we have within the BPA. Problem management has its own QA tab where it has things like an automatic pain value analysis calculation, which is essentially a way to automatically prioritize your problems based upon several characteristics, including associated incidents and length open and other items like that. So it's a very important piece of understanding the data that we need through the best practice accelerator. So if we look at the BPA overall and really what you get within the pre-configured instance, we get the process automation that has been pre-developed. So we have kind of a screen snap of a workflow within ServiceNow there within the BPA. So if you were to take a look at the process collateral that we give you for example, the change management process, and you were to go into the tool and look at the workflow, it's going to exactly match what we have defined within the best practice accelerator. We've definitely had an eye towards usability on the form and fields. In terms of field order and locations and things like that, we want to make sure that it flows from a process perspective so we're not doing a lot of jumping around. Of course, we get the data model that we've talked about. We have over 100 predefined business rules built within the BPA to support and automate the process. 60 notifications plus have been defined so that the templates are all there. They're all ready to go right out of the box. No tweaking necessary unless you want to customize some of the messaging. And then over 50 new reports have been added to ServiceNow to support the best practice accelerator and the information and reporting that we want to see to really pull the wisdom out of the data model that we have included with the BPA. So the current scope of the best practice accelerator is we have the pre-configured instance for incident management, problem management, and change management. So we've really concluded what I call the circle of life there as we move from incident and problem to change from an operational perspective. And very much central and core to all of that is the work we've done within the knowledge base as well in the best practice accelerator. All of the other processes are very much utilizing knowledge, whether that's knowledge-centered support from an incident perspective, known error and other information distribution about problem is very integrated with the knowledge base in the BPA. And then also from a change management perspective in terms of templating changes, knowledge base has been heavily customized for that as well. But we're not done with the BPA. It's something that is continually being developed. Coming soon, we are going to have a service request for the BPA as well. We'll include many of the most common request types that we see and we work with clients on, things like They're not just ordering supplies and goods and equipment, but also new employee onboarding and offboarding, which is a request that almost universally every client has an interest in. Quite often, it quite often has a need to improve as well. So service requests coming soon. On our roadmap, we have also a number of other processes coming in scope, including release and deployment management, which will be tightly coupled with change management from a more mature change perspective. IT costing and charging for those organizations that really want to understand how much services are costing them, and then if necessary, if they're an organization where they'd like to start charging for services, we're going to have the mechanism for all of that. Also, project and portfolio management is on the roadmap, as well as integration for availability and event management to even more tightly couple with incident management and other areas within the system. So let's talk about what a BPA activation engagement looks like. One of the keys is, as we saw before, one of our goals was rapid implementation in addition to the increased maturity. But really, BPA activation, we see that it works really in weeks rather than months or in years. And the way it starts is with a series of short, rapid solution workshops. And a couple of key things happen within these RSWs, or Rapid Solutions Workshops. And the first and foremost is we validate that best-of-breed process that we bring to the table with your organization. So we'll work through whatever the process is, incident or problem or change. We'll step through the process as we have it documented and defined. We'll get agreement in the organization that the workflow is right. We'll get agreement that the RACI and the policies and the procedures and the KPIs, all those process elements are right for your organization and are a good fit for your organization. Where necessary, we'll tailor that to your organization, but we always keep an eye as well on what we're seeing here, or what the process that we have defined here really is the best breed in the industry, and it works for most people really well. So if we need a tweak to it, that's fine, but let's just make sure that it really makes sense and make sure, do we really need to tweak it at all? And then if if it looks like that certainly does make sense, then we'll go ahead and tweak the process as necessary. In the second half of the workshops, after we have validated and agreed to the process, we then validate and tweak the requirements that have been documented with the BPA. So when we arrive with the BPA, we get the process collaterals, but we also get a fully documented requirement set that matches what the BPA is out of box. Having that material available allows us to very quickly and easily step through the requirements of what the BPA is today, and it becomes a validation session of, yes, this works for us, yes, this works for us, and we might want to tweak that or add something here. There's a data element or field that we can't live without, so we'll go ahead and add that. And then very quickly, as we get through these sessions, we'll come out with fully agreed processes, fully documented processes, and any tweaks to the requirements or additional requirements to what the BPA is out of box. And then additionally, as I mentioned before, we're going to help you define what your services are. We're going to help you decompose a number of your services so we understand what the mapping of them is, if you will, and have that available for loading within the BPA also. And this is not a long engagement. From small organization to large organization, the Rapid Solution Workshops typically will go 2 to 3 to 4 days per process, depending on which process it is. So it's a very, very quick model. We help facilitate that by doing some upfront kickoff work to get some of the organizational change aspects of such an activity as this going within your organization. So we'll work with your key stakeholders and decision makers to have them, have them even challenge your organization. Do we even need to change this at all? And if so, let's keep it minimal changes. And it's been a very positive, very successful solution for progressing and getting this done. I've had a number of clients tell us they really like the advice and guidance that this model brings, and certainly like the rapid time scale. Following the Rapid Solutions Workshop, we'll do a handoff to technical teams for any requirements, additions, or changes that there were, and we'll go ahead and get into implementation. which would be, the standard, the core setup of your instance, and then any configuration necessary for modifications to the BPA that we came up with during the validation and tailoring session during the Rapid Solution workshops. And then lastly, one part of the BPA value proposition is we include a free period of a coaching service that we have that we call CSI as a service. So after you're up and running, we're going to come back and work with you for a little bit and say, now that you're running in the tool, let's take a look at all these KPIs that we define and developed and see what they're really telling us. And let's see where things are working well, let's see where they're not, and then we're going to help you define improvement plans to course correct where necessary, to implement additional improvements as we might identify them, and then talk through the success of that and see if it makes sense to continue to move forward. So with the BPA activation or a BPA engagement, if you will, what really do you get? Well, you get the BPA instance that's fully configured as we have taken a look at. You get the complete process materials that we supply, and of course including any tweaks that we might have done during the Rapid Solution workshops. You get the Rapid Solution workshop time, including the inventory of your services. You get the implementation services from course setup, getting the BPA out of the box going, and then any custom configurations that we have determined. And then we do also include 60 days of that coaching service that I just mentioned for free. So who is BPA really a fit for? And if you look at everything from small organizations to mid-size to even enterprise, BPA has a place in each of these organizations. So a lot of times with the smaller organizations, the BPA has a value proposition from the perspective of, we really might not have very well-defined process, or, we have an inherent understanding that our processes are broken. So we just want to take something that works. It's really almost, we want the plug-and-play of good process that's just going to happen by using the tool. So we really like the BPA proposition. We're going to drop it in and we're going to run with it. When you get into the mid-sized environments, you typically see, potentially a little more process tweaking than you might in a small organization. So we can accommodate some of the uniquenesses that we see in the more mid-sized organizations. And then the BPA, even from an enterprise perspective, the BPA is built to a pretty robust level, to a pretty mature level. It's a very good fit even at the enterprise scale. And we've been very successful in very large organizations with the BPA, with our Rapid Solution workshops, as I talked about them, without having any kind of incompatibilities. The BPA works for smaller organizations very well as a plug and play, but it's also designed to be enterprise centric. It can handle things like multi-jurisdictional change management and all the complexities that you might see within a global organization. In fact, I have a great quote from one of our customers of ours. It was actually stated at Knowledge 12, and we're talking about our BPA. And she said, we just couldn't do this with what we've done without Fruition's accelerators. It was really key and successful in their organization, and that's a Fortune 100 company, so certainly in the enterprise class. So there's really a BPA fit for every organization. It's simply a matter of how much we need to tailor the BPA, if at all, once you get to the mid-size and enterprise size organizations. Now, much of what we've talked about is essentially focused on new installations of the BPA, or new ServiceNow customers, I should say. But the BPA also has a place for existing customers. We run this engagement slightly differently because you're within ServiceNow already. You have it built, configured to your environment, and you have certain elements in there that you might need to keep. So what we do is we start for existing customers right off the bat with an assessment that really includes a data maturity assessment of the data elements in your instance versus what we might see in a BPA. And then just an assessment overall of the maturity of your instance and the structure of your instance and how you have configured your instance. We also include a ServiceNow health check, so from an architectural standpoint, where does your instance look like? And then based on the assessment and the health check, we come up with a gap analysis of of where your instance varies from the BPA and where we can modify your instance to become the BPA. Of course, while merging in anything from your instance that you have that you can't live without because it's been defined and you're using it for some particular purpose. So, and then I've used the terminology here, upgrade. It's really almost more of a merging of your instance to make it the BPA alongside anything that you have in your instance that you need to retain. So you get to the value of the BPA and all of the value proposition that we've talked about from your existing instance. So as a quick recap, when you're doing an implementation, you really have no value until you're implemented. In fact, you're losing value until you're implemented. So we want to get there quickly, and that's one of the goals we've accomplished with the BPA. But it's about more than rapid implementation. We really want to help raise your ITSM maturity just as you do. And you can do a lot of that simply by using the tool, which automates the processes and the practices and gives you the data elements to really operate at a more mature level just by using the BPA. The other thing is to finally get us to that nirvana of understanding end-to-end services. We certainly build that right within the BPA, and there's a lot of value proposition from a reporting perspective and understanding really what's going on and how well your organization is delivering services. And then lastly, it allows us to enable CSI through our data model. So we're really going to learn by using our ITSM tool how we can improve going forward. I'd like to take just a brief moment to talk about our other consulting offerings. And if you look at the life cycle of our offerings, the BPA is actually kind of right in the middle of it. We also offer assessment and roadmap services, so we can examine either targeted ITIL processes or every ITIL process within your organization. We develop a crawl, walk, run roadmap for your organization that has the quick win tactical crawl items that you need to do to set yourself and set your organization up for increased maturity, and then the walk and the run improvement items that we would want to tackle in the near term and the long term to really help increase your ITSM maturity and help your ability to deliver services. One thing that's unfortunately all too often overlooked within any type of ITSM engagement is organizational change. I think everybody understands instinctively that it has to happen, and it should be part of a program. And typically what we have seen a lot of in the past is we've all talked about it and said, yep, we absolutely have to do that, and then we get on with the program and kind of forget about the whole organizational change piece. So we actually have a completely structured program to help you with that, that will work with your organization and make sure we're accounting for all of the communication needs, training needs, cultural needs of your organization. And in fact, just last week, if you did not attend, we had a webinar on organizational change, which will be posted shortly on our website if you'd like to check that out. And then, of course, the BPA activation, as we have talked about, as well as our continual service improvement as a service offering, where we will work with you for a slotted number of hours every month to help examine your KPIs and find out where you need to go next. And if you have done, or if we help you do an assessment and roadmap, we'll help you through that continual service life cycle of choosing the next improvement activities from that roadmap and re-examining the roadmap to see if it still makes sense and helping you actually through the implementation of that. We also offer ITIL and ServiceNow training, ServiceNow admin training and ITIL foundations training direct from Fruition Partners, as well as an ITIL simulation, which if you're not familiar with ITIL simulations, it's essentially a game that's played in a certain number of rounds. And it's revolved around IT, but it's a real eye-opener for executives and others in terms of understanding really why and how this ITSM stuff we keep talking about is important. And then lastly, a Service Desk Jumpstart, which is almost a small version of our CSI as a service offering, where we come in and help you define your real value proposition KPIs. And help you get what we call a value scorecard together that we can track and trend over time and see where your service desk needs to go to improve. I'd like to also invite you to our next webinar, Introduction to Request Fulfillment. What should I know before implementing the ServiceNow Service Catalog? There's, of course, many key considerations with the service catalog to make it important and effective for you. So that'll be Friday, July 27th. I would love to see you back for that one. Really good content in terms of making sure that we get a very effective service catalog. With that, I will open up the discussion to any questions that anyone might have. I see one question about how many customers have we used this approach with. We've used this approach with a very large number of customers, actually. We've started selling really almost every implementation that we do in terms of the BPA. Not every single one, but BPA is really more than one potential methodology. It's really the methodology that Fruition Partners uses for ServiceNow implementations moving forward. Had another question about where can we see a demo of the BPA pre-configured instance. The answer is if you either just go to fruitionpartners.com or if you email consulting@fruitionpartners.com, we're happy to go ahead and set up a personalized demo with you to explore the BPA a little bit further. Okay. Are there any other questions out there? Okay, it doesn't look like it. Looks like the last question I see is, will the PowerPoint presentation be available following this? The answer is the actual recording of this webinar will be on our website within 2 weeks from today. So go ahead and come on back to fruitionpartners.com and you will be able to see that. Okay. Well, if there are no other questions, thank you very much, everybody. We appreciate your time today. Hope we saw some value out of what we can do with the Best Practice Accelerator, and look forward to you at our next webinar, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
The